Now, before we get into everything that the filters can do and start walking through all these filters, let me show you something important. It's possible to do destructive filters and non-destructive filters. I'm just going to create a couple of copies of this apple, and I'm going to convert one into a smart object by right-clicking on it and telling it convert to smart object. There are, of course, the other ways of doing that. I'm just going to right-click it. Now, let's say that I came in and applied a filter. I could do something like apply pixelate and crystallize, and that would give me a number of options. In this case, the nice thing about crystallize is that the number of options is 1. So if we come in here, we can control how big the cells are or how small the cells are, and that's it. If I tell it OK, that's that. The original image is destroyed unless I thought to create a backup of it in advance. So that's about the end of that. Now, in some cases, you may think of the fade option under Edit Fade, but you'll see that in a lot of cases that's not available for filters. So, you may have some other choices such as the history brush. You could go in, open up your history window under View Window History. Just to set this from before the crystallize, lock that in, grab your history brush, and then using a different level of opacity, kind of bring back some of the apple. So that's one option, but another option would be to use smart objects. When you apply a filter to a smart object, let me just turn off the edited apple, turn on the smart object. When you apply filters to a smart object, it remains editable after the fact. Now let's try going to pixelate, crystallize. You'll see that we have crystallize, the same number of cells as before, and it crystallizes it. Now there's a slight difference. We have crystallize on here. Now if we were to click this small blending option editor, we'd have the ability to apply some direct edits to this, such as multiply and screen, all of them essentially, all of the blending modes that we've covered already in class. And it's the same thing as if we had duplicated this layer and set it to one of those modes. So for example, if I had created this and then on this edited one, set it to multiply, essentially the same effect. All right, so that's what this little dialog does, but there's more to it. If we double click on crystallize, the menu shows back up. And in fact, now we can edit it. So we could create, voila, different effects. We're no longer constrained to the exact same number as before. So if later we decide that we want to make a change, we can make that change. Now, you notice if I double click this little dialog box for the blending options, we can leave it on normal and we can just roll it back with opacity. Now, again, this is fill opacity for those of you who like to use wonderful things like the multiply layer and others that are affected by fill opacity, such as the hard mix. We can get some pretty incredible effects right off the bat. So that's part of the miraculous effect of the smart objects, but there's actually more to it. Let me turn this off and we'll do one more interesting thing. I will duplicate this apple a couple of more times, and we will again convert one into a smart object. I'm just going to right click and convert to smart object, which gives us a smart object apple and a standard object apple. Now I can also use my filter gallery, which is, and this, if it's the first time you've used the filter gallery, prepare to be wowed. I'm going to go up to filter and filter gallery. And this contains, and this is too big, a massive number of filters. And you can actually add to these by purchasing them and installing them. We're not going to do that for this class, but don't worry. So don't worry about that. For example, if we use glowing edge, we have the glowing edge filter. We can control the edge width, the brightness. I'm going to make that a little bit brighter. The smoothness, if you want it a little smoother or less smooth. All that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, that said, we have this menu over here. Now, this is like our layer palette, only it's for effects. If we place stained glass, oh, my apologies, undo that with Control Z. If I create a new layer effect, I'll have two glowing edges, but now I can change one to stained glass. And in stained glass, we have our cell size, Let's make that quite a bit bigger. Our border thickness, I'm just going to make that very small, and our light intensity. And you can see how that's affecting essentially the stained glass. It's trying to add a light behind it, so to speak. Now, what's fascinating about this is that I can change the order of these. I can move stained glass below glowing edge, and look at that crazy effect that's occurring. Stained glass above it, voila. And what if I just turn off the eyeball on one? Well, now I have simply one effect. So if I tell it OK, with stained glass and glowing edge below, I've destroyed the original image. This was a destructive edit. Now, if I come in to my smart object and instead go to filter gallery, and notice it has the previous filter gallery settings, but let's go in here. You can see that as long as I don't close Photoshop, it will remember my last settings in filter gallery. So I'm just going to apply it as is. And now we don't get crystallize down here like we had with crystallize. We instead have the filter gallery. So if we double click on the filter gallery, we can go back in to the entire gallery. So now we could do something like change the order and tell it OK. Voila, we can alter that as many times as we want. We can even turn it on and off. Now we can also stack these. For example, if I were to go in and now do pixelate crystallize, I could create some smaller cells, and you'll see that I have the crystallize above the filter gallery, but I can rearrange it on my smart object. So now I have crystallize below my filter gallery, and I can see how it looks like with or without it by simply toggling things on or off. Now this gets even more fun. You can keep stacking to it. So if I go to filter, blur gallery, let's actually just do a blur, Gaussian blur. I can add a blur, and it's added to my stack, so I can move that around. Now, watch what happens though when I go to filter gallery again. We can see all of the settings that we had before, and if I press OK, you can see that it's actually stacked it. Now, depending on your version of Photoshop, you may not be able to do that, so do be cautious. On newer versions of Photoshop, it's not a problem. Just keep adding them on. Now, all of that said, you also have a mask, which means that you can simply mask out all of your filters at once, if you so desire, by coming in and filling it with a level of gray or black. So let me go ahead and set this to the hue saturation and load it in with some gray and make sure my mask is active. Alt-delete to fill. And voila, we have some amazing effects occurring almost immediately. So this raises a question pretty quickly. Why not just always use the smart filters? Well, there is a caveat. If you come over to filters, you can see that in some cases, you do not have access to everything, such as the lens blur or the vanishing point. Neither of those are available to you with the smart objects. You can't render out flames or trees. You can do more and more though every version. My hope is eventually you can affect everything with everything. In other words, right now we can only affect we can only affect standard objects with every layer, with every filter. There we go. Standard layers with every filter. But eventually I hope that we'll be able to affect every smart layer with filters. So watch out for that. It's always evolving. And I feel as though it's very important to keep in mind that there is a difference between the two. And occasionally you cannot access your filters. That just means you need to create a copy of your smart object as a standard object. My preferred way of doing that is Control-Alt-Shift-E to just create a stamped version of everything. And from there, you can apply all of your filters, even your iris blurs and whatnot, lens blurs and everything that would normally not be available. So that's the difference between the smart filters and the standard filters. Filter gallery is a beast in and of itself, which allows you to come in and create, oh, my apologies, I'm on the wrong layer. That allows you to come in and build up sets of filters. And yeah, the filter galleries can now be stacked. Oh, I'm falling slightly off this. They can be stacked on top of each other inside of a smart object. But in older versions of Photoshop, you won't be able to do that. You'll be restrained to only using one filter gallery. So keep that in mind. Another nice thing is you can always come back and adjust your opacities or your blending modes of these filters that have been applied, including the filter galleries. And you can do an overall application as well, just through masks. And you can mask in, of course, some points and not others. So if I were to come in here with a large white brush, I could just affect this in some areas and not others. And let's use something a little more subtle, maybe 20% fuzzy brush. We can start bringing that in. Notice it's very processor intensive to get all this done. So if you're on an older machine, you may need to use your smart filters sparingly. You may want to pre-design your masks and paste them in just so that it doesn't choke up your system. I'm going to hide these rulers. There we go. There you go. I think that's pretty amazing. All right, so that's how Smart Objects, Filter Gallery, and standard filters work on different pieces. Okay, let's tune in to how to apply some of these filters, what they do.